Challenge these through strategic litigation, and that's discussed in the toolkit, and I'll discuss more about that later today. But the one thing I wanted to highlight is you have the ability to restrict yourselves from accepting conditional grants. There's nothing to stop states from passing laws that says we will not accept conditional grants in our state, period. If you don't think that makes sense, many states have the ability to put referendums out. I suggest every state consider amending their constitution to at least engage the people in reviewing the strings attached to federal grants. Make any acceptance of conditional grants subject to referral to the people to approve. And you might ask why? Well, the reason is the 10th Amendment guarantees the reservation of power to the states and, or I should say, or the people. So one key concept is, if you're serious about blocking conditional grants, think about prohibiting conditional grants programs. If you think that's going too far, it's too restrictive, then think about creating a referral right to the people who are also protected by the 10th Amendment. And if that still scares you, use the idea of interstate compacts to create we all jump when somebody jumps scenarios. Look, the ultimate objection to refusing conditional grants is that you feel like your tax money is going to someone else. Why not agree with other states that once a certain number of them refuse to accept conditional grants, then immediately and effectively everyone refuses conditional grants. If nobody's willing to take these conditional grants, then it's going to have to come back some other way. You'll certainly have a better bargaining position than you have right now. The next thing I wanted to emphasize is really you have to look at the Article 5 Amendments Convention process. You have to look at this process because the founders intended for the states to have the ultimate fail-safe against the federal government by virtue of the fact that they have the power to initiate amendments to the Constitution. Contrary to what some have said, the founders were unanimous among those who spoke on the issue in support of states using their Article 5 powers to amend the Constitution. James Madison supported it in Federalist 43. Alexander Hamilton supported it in Federalist 85. George Washington supported it in his personal correspondence. Thomas Jefferson supported it in his personal correspondence. Without question, historically, the founders put the state-initiated amendments convention process in Article 5 to be used in times when the federal government is doing things like TARP and Obamacare, completely overriding any check or balance, any balance of power that the founders originally established. So you need to consider using that. And there are lots of great ideas out there. The idea that we are advancing and was approved, at least subject to Board of Directors approval, is a National Debt Relief Amendment, which simply says any increase in the federal debt requires the approval of a majority of state legislatures. That's it. What this does is it gives the states a role in the federal government that they once had under the original plan before the 17th Amendment took the states out of the Senate. And it gives it a powerful role because, let's face it, the federal government's running on debt. So there are other great ideas, and Professor Barnett will be talking about the repeal amendment, and then of course you've got the balanced budget amendment that's been part of the ALEC pantheon or canon for some time now. But you need to think about that ultimate fail-safe because you can't be a constitutionalist and ignore an essential component of the Constitution. And then lastly, I want to highlight again the interstate compacts idea. Now, one thing that you may not have heard in the last presentation is the fact that there is an existing statute passed by Congress that gives pre-consent, gives advance consent to any interstate compact among states that coordinates and enforces criminal law. And anything convenient there too. It is that broad. It doesn't say, so long as it doesn't interfere with federal laws, it just gives this blanket, no strings attached, advance consent from Congress to interstate compacts that deal in criminal law. This is the only federal statute that does this in that blanket and unconditional way. There are numerous federal statutes that give advance consent, and all of those advance consent statutes otherwise say you can't do one that conflicts with federal law. The conclusion that I draw, both as a legal scholar and a litigation attorney, is that this is an opportunity. If you really believe in resisting federal power and you want a chance of winning as opposed to just having civil disobedience, here's what I suggest you try doing. You ought to try to take, when you have a state that has a Healthcare Freedom Act or a Firearms Freedom Act that establishes under your state constitution or state law certain rights, individual rights to freedom of choice in healthcare, or rights to interstate manufacturing and sales of firearms, take that existing legal framework, make any violation by anyone of those rights a criminal offense, pair up with a state that thinks like you on the same topics, make sure they criminalize any violation of those rights, and reach a compact and lodge it with Congress. And then bring on the fight when the IRS comes in and tries to penalize people for not following the individual mandate. Because you will have a solid legal argument. I'm not guaranteeing you're going to win. You can have the best legal argument in the world, and most lawyers will tell you it'll be a 60% chance of winning, right? You have the worst legal argument in the world. Most lawyers will tell you you have a 40% chance of winning, right? I'm not saying you're going to win, but I can tell you this. You've got a plausible, winnable legal argument against the individual mandate when you can say to the court, relying on a body of case law, that it is effectively a federal crime for you to try to penalize people for having freedom of choice in their health care services within our jurisdiction. And you know what? You'd have a real respectable pedigree for this kind of tactic. Because in the 1850s, 1840s, up until the Civil War, one way that the northern states did try to resist the Fugitive Slave Act was that they criminalized the disorderly seizure of slaves that had escaped slavery within their jurisdiction. And they routinely, in many cases, threw into jail people who came up, slave hunters, to grab slaves when they didn't follow the processes they set out in state law. They criminalized that. Now, unfortunately, the Supreme Court at the time was committed to the impossible compromise on slavery, and ultimately these efforts were struck down, leaving only one recourse, and that was the Civil War, to preserve the freedoms that underlie our Constitution. But the fact is, by criminalizing violations of fundamental freedoms, such as you could do and could try to do, you would be on the side of the angels. You would be on the side of those who tried to liberate slaves. And that's a proud heritage to stand on the side of. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Sorry, just testing my mic.
Is it working?
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, it might be made in China or something.
Am I up now? The day after the election, President Obama had a press conference at the White House, the post-election press conference. He said he got the message of the people, he would be moving to the center, all of this sort of thing. And then the question and answer session started, and one of the questions was, what happens now on cap and trade? Now, surely the Republicans won't pass it in the House. And President Obama said, well, cap and trade was always just a means, it wasn't the end. And there's more than one way to skin that cat. That's pretty close to the exact quote of what he said. And what was he talking about? How else might they skin the cat, and what end was he talking about? Well, I think the end that he was talking about was to dramatically restrict energy use in this country by causing prices to skyrocket and bankrupting the coal industry. He was candid about that in an interview with the San Francisco Chronicle on the campaign trail that many of you have probably seen. It became infamous. And so what are the other ways that he might skin that cat, and that we might have a whole bunch of naked cats when it comes to affordable energy? And you know, the most immediate threat and the most relevant one to you guys before I get into the EPA stuff is the shift to the state level to accomplish these objectives, both through renewable electricity mandates and through state and regional cap and trade programs. And we've got an operational cap and trade program in 10 northeastern states from Maine to Maryland. It's called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. They have quarterly auctions for the right to emit carbon dioxide for power plants, and they've got to buy these permits. It's required. They put the cost back into the rate base so the customers don't see it. It's a secret hidden tax. And most of those states have now taken the money out of energy efficiency programs and just put it into their general fund budgets, making it completely and incontrovertibly nothing more than a hidden tax. 2 other states are set to start cap and trade in 2012, California and New Mexico. We hope that New Mexico will undo that mistake. They've got a governor now who's committed to undoing that. California rejected an opportunity to do so in this past election. California is now talking about